to Alt Text Made Easy, kind of. This is the November 2025 session of Nichols Strategies Digital Accessibility Professional Learning Community. For those of you who I might be meeting for the first time, I am Emily Popek, APR. I'm Vice President for Strategic Communications at Nichols Strategies. We are a full-service PR firm that works exclusively with schools and school districts. We work alongside people just like you to help you do your very best work possible. Our topic today is alt text. Our goal is to make your life a little easier when it comes to understanding alt text, what it is not, tools we can use to support us in writing the best alt text possible, and how to handle a few specific types of situations that I think are really common in our work. So we're going to start with the definition. What is alt text? What does it do? Alt is short for alternative, so the full name is alternative text. And what alternative text is metadata. It's behind the scenes data that you don't see unless you go looking for it, unlike something like a caption or a file name, which is right out there for all to see. And what alt text does is it describes the image for someone who may not be perceiving it visually. Maybe it's a photo, maybe it's a graphic, a logo, a button, a checkbox, a control of some kind. It could be a number of different things. And the alt text is there to describe the meaning and the purpose of that non-text content, again, primarily for the benefit of someone who's not perceiving it visually. It's important to know, and I'm really going to hit this hard in our conversation today, that alt text is all about unique meaning. It's all about capturing what does this image have to say in the context where it is situated. And there's different types of meaning, right? Some images convey facts, details, data. A chart, a graph, a stop sign, a company's logo. Those images convey really specific information. Other images convey emotion, they express a feeling, they're there for vibes, right? That photo of a smiling student that we put front and center on the homepage of our website is there to convey an emotional impression. It's not communicating facts and figures, it's communicating feelings. And there are also situations where images denote an action, right? It's a button I need to click. It's the search bar. It's that navigation item in that drop-down menu. So those are some of the types of non-text content that we're going to talk about today. One way that we can think about what alt text needs to do on a web page or in a document is to imagine that you're on the phone with someone and you're describing that web page or describing that document or that social media post to that person on the other end of the phone. Whatever you would say to them is what the alt text would be. So what that means for us is that images that are purely decorative, they're only there for visual appeal, we wouldn't describe those at all to the person on the other end of the phone, right? So those don't need any alt text at all, and we'll talk a lot more about that. I'm hoping that you'll leave this discussion feeling empowered and feeling like, hey, this might actually be easier than I thought, because that's kind of how I felt after doing my research. So the first thing I want to do is to look at the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines to unpack what they have to say about alt text. One thing to note, there are 86 individual success criteria in the WCAG standards. Only 2 of those relate to alternative text. So we don't have a lot of really detailed guidance language in the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines that tells us exactly what to do. I'm going to share with you what we do have. It's also worth noting that this success criterion does not differentiate between, images, videos, graphics, logos, whatever the case may be. The standard language just refers to non-text content, and that covers a broad range of situations. So what does the success criterion say? It says, first, meaningful non-text content should have a text alternative that, quote, serves the equivalent purpose, right? This is pretty straightforward. The fundamental idea is that all your users are going to get the same meaning out of this content, regardless of their ability, regardless of the modality in which they're receiving this information. If there are any words in your image, those need to also appear in the form of text, and we'll talk more about that in a minute. This success criterion does not set any specific character limit or word count on alternative text. You may hear people say like, oh, it needs to be this many characters, etc. That's more of a best practice for usability reasons. It's not anything that's enshrined in these success criteria. What WCAG does say in its tutorial on alt text is, and I quote, the alt text should be the most concise description possible of the image's purpose. I'm highlighting this because reading that to me lifts some of the burden about how descriptive our alt text needs to be, right? The most concise description possible. So keep that in mind as you're thinking about how to write good, high quality, meaningful alt text. So the other success criterion that speaks to this is 1.4.5 images of text. There will not be a test on these success criterions. I just wanted you to have this information. This criterion is very clear that if you can, whenever you're able, whenever the technology allows for it, the words should be words and not a picture of words. When the technology allows it, we should present text as text. Why is this important? The success criterion explains that one reason is that users may require that text to appear in a specific way so that they can perceive or understand it. So it needs to be customizable to that end user's needs. There's a big note in the success criterion. That's really hard to say. This says, look, we're really talking about not having images of text, not using an image of text instead of text. What we're saying is that it's not okay for the words to just be in an image. That wouldn't be accessible to everyone. What do I mean by an image of text? I mean like a JPEG, a PNG, an image file that has words in it. I can't click, drag, select, and highlight with my cursor. There are a few exceptions here. One would be if the image of text was presented in such a way that the end user could still customize the appearance of it. I'm going to be honest with you, I don't know how to do that. I'm not sure what that would look like in practice, but that is one of the exceptions that the guidelines specify. A more relevant one would be that there are exceptions made in instances where the specific visual presentation of the text is the point. And the most common example that they share is a logo, right? Your district logo lockup, where the name of your school district is presented in like a specific visual way. That specific visual presentation has a specific meaning. So you can use that, obviously, and then, you would have either alternative text that repeats that name or accompanying text adjacent to it to identify that image. Another exception would be if you were showing a sample or a visual example of something, right? A handwriting sample or a visual example of a specific font. Those would be presented as images of text because that's the point of that image, right? But then there's also times when you might want to be able to do both. You might want sighted people to see a specific visual, but you might also want to provide that same information for someone who's not sighted. So here's a super relevant example from the WCAG tutorial on alt text, and I'm going to quote to you here. A user has to upload an event poster or flyer image, which includes text, to their website. The site's CMS is limited and will not allow them to create a custom HTML recreation of that poster. However, in addition to the image, they can add regular text to that post. So they post both the poster image and the text contained in the image. The text is shown next to the poster image on the page. I feel like this is a really good analog for us to understand what's permissible in a situation we find ourselves in all the time, right? Someone hands us a Canva flyer. It's got a ton of words in it. It's just an image. What do we do? The WCAG tutorial says you can upload that image. Just have the same information in text right there alongside it. I just saw a demo earlier this week of Peachjar's new product, Ada, their accessibility add-on. And that's basically what it does, right? It creates a text version of your flyer and it displays that alongside the image. Now, whether you think that's a best communications practice, that's a different question. But I wanted to highlight the fact that this specific example is called out by WCAG to say, yeah, that's fine. You can have both, because I know this is a situation where you run into all the time. So let's turn now to some more specific use cases for writing alt text that we might run into in the course of our work. The first would be images that are purely decorative, right? The visual is just there to add visual interest or to catch the eye, but it is not conveying any unique meaning. The easy way to tell is, right, if I deleted that image from the page, would any unique information or meaning be lost? The unique part of that is what's important. Every image can convey some kind of information, right? But is that information unique? Let's take the first example, the photograph on this page. We can see students in a classroom. If we were to take that photo off of this web page, I would argue no unique meaning has been lost. There's no strong emotional resonance. It's essentially being used as stock photography to, for lack of a better word, dress up the page. It's really playing the same role as, graphic design decor, lines, swirls, dots, things like that, aspects of the visual design that are not there to convey meaning. I cited on a webinar recently where the host said that in his organization, their default position when they upload photos to their website is to assume that it is decorative. So their default is that all photos are decorative unless specified otherwise. And I thought that was really fascinating. At first, I was like, that's crazy. Of course, all your photos aren't decorative. But the more I thought about how we use photos on our websites, oftentimes they really are decorative in nature. A lot of the images we add to our web pages and even our digital documents are really primarily there to add visual appeal. I built this website, this web page. I didn't build the whole website. I created this web page for a client, the web page you see here that's labeled academics. And when I was putting it together, I was like, this page looks a little dry, looks a little bleak. I'm going to throw a photo on there. It's purely there for visual reasons. It's not conveying a significant emotional message. And I know that because I'm the one who put it there, and I know what my intent was in choosing it. But let's look at another example of a situation where an image might be purely decorative for a different reason. So across the bottom of the screen, there's a black bar and there's some social media icons and links. In this case, we have logos accompanied by text. In this instance, the images, those icons, would be considered decorative because they are redundant to the text that appears right next to them. There's no unique meaning being conveyed by the icon because the text is already conveying that identical meaning. So in a case like this, where the image would be redundant or where it's purely decorative, the recommendation is to leave the alt text field empty. By doing so, we cue screen reader software that they can just skip right over it. They're going to provide no information to the end user, which is what we would want. Some CMSs will have a checkbox where you can check mark that something is decorative. And if you have that functionality, you can use that too. But in the absence of any other way, you could just leave that alt field empty. Now, Kendra asked in the Q&A, if you are required to have something in the alt text, what should you do? And if you can use null, I'll have to get back to you on that because I don't know the answer. Jessica asked, couldn't you still make the alt text something like students using computers in a classroom? You can. However, what I want to argue is that that's not actually meaningful information for someone who has come to this web page, right? If I have come to this web page looking for information about the academic program at this school, it probably will not benefit my understanding to hear my screen reader say to me, students using computers in a classroom. That's not super meaningful information. At the end of the day, if the image is really only there for visual appeal, we want screen readers to skip over it. I will say this is most likely to occur in web content and in documents. I don't think this use case is really common on social media. I can't imagine a situation where we would upload an image to social media and then mark it as decorative. So I think we're mostly talking about documents and web pages here. If we can take this information in and understand that like things that are just there for visual appeal do not require any alt text, that means there's this whole swath of images that we don't have to write any alt text for. We don't have to come up with anything intelligent to say about them. And that's hopefully somewhat of a relief. If you want to dig into this aspect of it a little further, there's a QR code and a URL in your screen that has more detail on this subject of leaving the alt field empty, which I know feels scary, right? So read more here, and I'll share this link out afterwards if you want to get a more solid grounding on when it would be okay to have an empty alt field and where you would want the screen reader to skip over it. The second type of situation I want to talk about is, I think, very, very common in our work, but a little trickier, which would be images that are conveying an expression or an emotion, vibes, right? An image that we have chosen because we want someone to feel a certain way. Now, the line between a decorative image and an image conveying expression or emotion, it's really a gray area. It's a judgment call, right? But the good news is, as a communications professional, you are by far the best equipped person to make that judgment. We are really well grounded in being able to think about why this image? Why was this image chosen in this context? Why is this image on my homepage? Why is this image on the cover of my annual report, right? What am I trying to say with it? What is it that I want people to know or understand about my organization that this image is conveying? At the top of the screen is one example. This is from a document that was prepared for a district that I worked with. I didn't select this image, but given the context of this document where we're talking about the district's learning model, we're talking about co-constructing meaning, collaboration, I could imagine that the impression this image is trying to convey is something like our district supports teacher collaboration. Here's another example straight from WCAG. This screenshot showing two adults and a child is from the WCAG website is an example of an image that's being used as sort of a stock image to convey an expression or emotion. And what WCAG says is, look, if you're using essentially a stock photo to convey an emotional impression, then your alt text should reflect that. So instead of saying, two parents and a child, students sit in a classroom, we're being asked to say the quiet part out loud and describe not the content of the image, not the appearance of the image, but the meaning of it. The reason this image was chosen was to convey an emotional impression. In this case, the emotional impression that our company is family friendly. So that's what the alt text says. The alt text literally reads, "We are family friendly." I found this really radical the first time I read this and also really clarifying because it reminded me that alt text is not about describing the appearance of an image. The most important thing is not that, this little kid is wearing a cable knit sweater or that they're sitting in front of a log, right? Those are not the most important things about this image. That's not the emotional message that is being conveyed. And I think we run into this situation a lot in our work, right? We are very often trying to convey an emotional impression with the images that we use, especially the images of our students and our staff, right? So this approach really empowers us and gives us an opportunity to convey that same emotional resonance even to our non-sighted, our blind, or our low vision audiences. Now, again, what's the line between decorative and expressive images? It's not a bright line. It's really a gray area. If you are feeling stumped or challenged by the idea of writing this style of expressive alt text, my suggestion to you would be consider if you can mark it decorative instead. In the instance of this report, where we see teachers in a classroom, like I could really go either way. Is it expressive or is it decorative? I would argue that no significant unique meaning is lost if I remove that photo or if I were to mark it as decorative. And that's kind of my litmus test. If I remove the photo, is any significant meaning lost? And if the answer is no, arguably, I could mark it as decorative. I know there's a lot of questions in the chat, and I am going to come back to those. But I'm going to move through our third example first, which is informational images. This is much more straightforward. This is the easy part. These are your charts, your graphs, your buttons, menu items, diagrams, infographics, right? These are some more examples from WCAG to help us consider some do's and don'ts. And I'm going to talk about charts and graphs on the next slide. I think this use case is a little less common in our day-to-day, but it does come up at times. If we have something like an icon, here we see a phone or a fax icon. For something very simple like that, it is sufficient to just essentially label it in the alt text field. So the alt text would just say phone or fax. I don't have to say logo of a phone, icon showing a piece of fax, right? I don't have to do that. I can just label that because that's the essential meaning that these icons are conveying. Below that, we have this adorable dog who's clearly a good boy, illustrating a paragraph about off-duty guide dogs. The alt text for this one reads, "Dog with a bell attached to his collar." That's the relevant, unique meaning being conveyed by this image. Again, here they pointed out, look, could this be considered a decorative image? Maybe, but if you were to write the alt text, focus on the reason this image is here. What work is this image doing? The reason this image here is that it's illustrative of the bell that is on his collar. So that is what you would focus on in your alt text. The third example that WCAG offers is of a simple diagram such as that which you might see on the top of a pill bottle. In this instance, your alt text would describe the meaning of the diagram, which is to instruct someone how to perform that action. So we're not going to say, it's a diagram with an arrow pointing down, and no, we're going to skip to the point. What information is being conveyed by this diagram? Well, the diagram is telling us to push down and turn. That's what our alt text would say. It's a summary. It's not like a blow-by-blow description. It's distilling the essence of what is this image telling someone? What is this image communicating to someone? And that's what goes in our alt text. Now, what about something more complex, a chart, a graph, an infographic, something that can't be summed up in just a few years, not years, in a few words. Try that again. So here's a few considerations to keep in mind, and this is going to depend on the complexity of your image and whether it's a document versus a web page. If you're in an HTML environment, one option would be to link out or to provide a longer text-based description via either a link or what's called a long desk attribute. This is sort of like an alt text attribute, but it's specifically to provide a longer description for non-text content. Now, your CMS might not support this. This is like really in the weeds HTML stuff. Might not be feasible in all instances, but I'm mentioning it anyway. Alternatively, you could just like link out to a separate web page, right? And regardless of whether you're on a web page or in a document, you can always provide a text-based description of that complex graphic adjacent to that image. It's important to remember not to rely on color alone to signify difference. So another tip is to label your chart points with like ABC or 1, 2, 3, and then provide a text-based legend for your chart that conveys that same information. So if I had a pie chart that was like, 22% and 85% da da da, I could have a text-based legend that says, section A, 22%, section B, 81%. And then what the alt text field can do is summarize what is this a chart of? Again, we're going to use our imagination here and think if someone asks us, well, what does that chart show? That short answer is what you would put in the alt text. And the longer description that actually contains the data should appear in a text-based form elsewhere. So my alt text might say, pie chart of the three-part district budget, and then my longer description, wherever that appears, however I'm providing that, would actually give that breakdown of all of the, slices of the pie chart. This is a balancing act of sorts, and it's nuanced, but the overall idea is to balance a shorter alt text summary with a longer text-based description that contains the data that is represented in your chart in whatever format your format supports. That's the overall concept. What about galleries, photo galleries, especially on social media where we have multiple photos? We're uploading 10, 20, 50 photos from graduation. The use case for alt text feels less clear here sometimes, right? I want to tell you guys in full candor, this was a real research challenge for me. I did not find a lot of really clear guidance around this specific topic of social media galleries in particular. As we already saw, the WCAG success criteria don't speak to this issue at all. I found some examples of what you can do if you're like a web developer and you're like coding how the carousel is going to appear on the homepage, but that's not what we're talking about here. So here are a few thoughts that you can keep in mind if you're uploading a big batch of photos to a social media platform. In a way, conceptually, this is the same idea that we were just talking about with charts and graphs and diagrams. The idea would be to balance shorter alt text with a longer description that appears alongside it. Think of the post for the former journalists out there. Think of your post as like your nut graph. Your post content is where you can summarize the who, what, where, when, why, and how. What is this a gallery of? What's the theme or the focus of this gallery of images? And then in the individual alt text for each image, the idea would be to focus on what makes that image distinctive. Now, in many cases, what makes the individual images distinctive is who is being depicted in them. Different districts have different practices when it comes to this. I know many districts do not identify students by name, especially in social media. If you do, I would suggest going ahead and naming that student in the alt text if that is one of the clear distinctive factors about the image. Now, I'm going to take the mea culpa here because this goes against advice I've given in the past, so I'm just going to be completely transparent about that. The more I have learned and read about alt text, the more I have understood that it is more appropriate to say something like, Barack Obama shakes hands with George W. Bush than it would be to be like, a black man shakes hands with a white man. Like, that's not the meaning. If the identity of the people is central to the meaning being conveyed, then that should appear in the alt text. So that's one possibility. However, again, I know that your district may not use student names online. Totally understand that. If that were the case, you would want to focus on what distinguishes this photo from the one that came before. Is it the composition, the angle in which the photo was taken? Is the emotional expression? Is it an action, tears, a hug? Is one a bird's eye view and the other's close up? Find
Means when it's
something.
convenient for people.
Oh, I'm sorry. I heard someone come off mute. I'm just going to mute that person for just a moment. So focusing on what's unique about that image to the extent possible. Again, this is an art, not a science. And it's not a perfect process when you have like 53 graduation photos, but that's kind of conceptually, I think, the best approach to take. So let's talk about the pros and cons of using artificial intelligence to generate alt text or some tips for doing that. Some of the benefits of using AI to generate alt text, one would be that you can generate alt text in batches, depending on which large language model you're using. Some of these tools will allow you to upload multiple files at a time, right? And it'll spit out a string of alt text for you. Uh, if you continue using the same prompt or project in a specific large language model, you can continue to refine and update that as needed. And that large language model should learn and remember your preferences, right? So you can sort of train this tool to give you exactly the output that you are looking for and return to it time and time again. If you have an account you can log into that will retain that kind of information. AI generated alt text could be a really good starting point or supportive tool for someone who is brand new to the process of creating it. It could be a confidence builder so you don't get alt text writer's block and you at least have some place to start from. And I think that's especially true if if an AI tool is native to the platform you're using. If there's this prompt that pops up and says like, "Hey, is this alt text accurate for this image?" It's pretty seamless to just accept or edit that suggestion and move on. So that can be a really easy practice to adopt again, especially if you're just getting started with the practice of using alt text. Some of the cons I want you to be aware of. One would be that AI generated alt text tends to be very verbose because it is not always able to discern what information is important in a given context. So at times it will default to describing a lot of the visual detail. It can kind of miss the point. We've been talking today about meaning versus content, about describing the actual meaning of an image, not just its appearance. And this is where AI can struggle at times depending on the situation. It can misread an image altogether, or it can miss aspects of the image that you might want to be described. In a webinar I sat in on recently, they actually showed an example where AI actually sanitized the alt text. There was text in the image, and AI would not use the word blind to create alt text, even though that word appeared in the source image. So quality can be an issue, and your results may vary. And then, of course, there's obviously privacy considerations. I know some of our organizations may not permit us to upload something like images of students into a large language model. I will note that a lot of these models do enable you to control your privacy settings, to delete content, but I also understand those safeguards may not address the concerns we have about exposing our students' likenesses to these large language learning models. So that may make these tools a non-starter for you when it comes to things like photos of students. The bottom line for me, the thing that really struck me was that, again, really considering that our alt text should be as concise as possible, I don't personally actually find much of a time savings by using it. By the time I locate the photo, upload the photo, run the prompt, copy and paste that into whatever tool I'm using, 99 out of 100 times, it actually would have been just as quick or quicker for me to simply write that alt text myself. So you may or may not find that using these external tools presents you with any type of significant time savings. So to kind of close this out and summarize, I wanted to share this excellent graphic that I'm using with permission from a Substack newsletter that's called Ally Explained. Thanks to Diana for allowing me to reproduce her graphic here because I think it's a lovely encapsulation of some important key principles. This is from a newsletter that was titled Writing Good Alt Text Sounds Simple Until You Actually Try, which is a little bit discouraging, but here are some of her tips. And I'll link out to this newsletter with my notes from our session today. Again, right, it's so important to focus on the purpose, not the appearance, not just what things look like, but what they actually mean. To be concise but complete, we don't need to say things like an image of or a picture of. The exception to this might be things like charts or graphs, but in general, we don't need to say that it's image because that's understood. It's all about meaning. Rarely is the fact that it's a photo the most important meaning being conveyed. We want to describe information, not decoration, not blue swirls or red underlines, but the meaning that's being conveyed. If there's text in the image, and if that text is not repeated adjacent, it should be in the alt text. It's vital that we adapt our alt text to the context in which the image was presented. I know someone mentioned that that can be a real stumbling block if we are working in a CMS where the alt text travels with the image. I don't have a technical workaround to that, but I would just say to be aware of that. Understand how alt text operates within your CMS and know that if you change it in one instance, that change may follow that image if it appears elsewhere on your site. When I first started learning about alt text, I had just come from a decade in a print newsroom, and I remember thinking, like, this is really dumb. Like, why isn't alt text just metadata that accompanies the image wherever it goes? But now I understand that that's actually usually not what we would want. What we would ideally want is to be able to customize our alt text for the context in which the image appears. But again, your CMS may not support that kind of nuanced functionality, and you may have to, sort of adapt your alt text with that in mind. The last note on this slide is that testing is an important part of this process. The gold standard is user testing, field testing with actual screen reader users. The silver standard, I would say, would be for people like us to use some of those same tools of assistive technology to make sure the alt text is actually being read properly by the screen reader. And then like the bronze or like brass or pewter standard, I guess, would be, like cover up the image and pretend all you have is the alt text and see if it still makes sense. Andrew asked in the chat, if you're taking pictures in the classroom and there's text in the photo that's unrelated to the purpose of the photo, should that still be in the alt text? The alt text should convey the meaning being conveyed by the photo. So it really would depend on the context in which that image is being shared. If the purpose of that image, if the role of that image on the web page or in the document is to convey that information that's written on the blackboard, then I would say yes. But if not, then I would argue no. So I'm going to close out our presentation now so that we have more time for discussion, but I have a little housekeeping before I do. I have to reschedule our December meeting because of a travel conflict. I really apologize for that. I try not to make any changes to these dates once they're scheduled, but this one was unavoidable. If you already registered for December's session, I will send you an updated link. If you have not registered for December yet, the QR code will take you to that rescheduled registration date. Again, I really apologize for the inconvenience, but I'm looking forward to talking about testing and remediation tools with you. And by the time we meet in December, I should be able to tell you more about our 2026 sessions as well. I also want to share with this group that I am going to be co-hosting a two-part workshop series with the Kane County Regional Office for Education with Justin Sampson. Justin, if you're here, say hi in the chat. The first session is in December. I'm going to grab a link and drop that link into the chat in just a minute, but I hope you'll join us for those workshops as well. We're really going to take a broad view on this topic, not just from a communications perspective, and try to share information that will be useful to a wide swath of people beyond just comms. So, send me your assistant superintendents and your curriculum directors, please, for that one. As always, you'll find all things PLC at nicholsstrategies.com/PLC. That's where this will go once I upload it. You should get everything from the session in your inbox within the next few business days. And thank you for hanging in with me for this longer than standard presentation.